The call came at 9:40 on Thanksgiving night, and by 4 a.m., I had kicked my own front door off its hinges, crossed a living room full of broken glass, and said 5 words to my son-in-law that wiped every ounce of color out of his face. "Get your hands off her." That was all. 5 words, quiet ones, the kind I'd learned to use when I wanted a man to understand that the easy part of the evening was already over. Before I tell you the rest, do me a favor and subscribe, and leave a comment telling me what time it is where you're watching from. I read every one of them. Now let me back up, because none of this makes sense without the years that came before. My name doesn't matter much. I'm 63. I spent 31 years as a forensic accountant, which is a fancy way of saying I got paid to find the money people hid and the lies they told to hide it. Divorces, embezzlement, insurance fraud, estates where one sibling quietly drained the joint accounts while mom was still warm. I sat in a lot of conference rooms across the table from a lot of people who were very sure I'd never figure them out. Most of them were wrong. You spend 3 decades watching the gap between what people say and what their bank statements say, and you stop being surprised by anything. You also stop trusting a warm smile that isn't backed up by a paper trail. My wife passed 11 years ago, pancreatic, fast, cruel. After that, it was just me and our daughter, except our daughter was already grown by then. Meredith. She was the better part of both of us, sharp and kind in a way that doesn't usually come in the same person. She taught 2nd grade. She sent me photos of her students' artwork like they were her own kids. When she fell for a man named Garrett Voss, I told myself my hesitation was just an old widower not wanting to share the only family he had left. I should have trusted the hesitation. Garrett sold commercial real estate, or said he did. He had a good handshake and a better story, and he looked you in the eye exactly long enough to make you think he was honest. When they got engaged, I helped them buy a house outside Bosman. Nice place, 3 bedrooms, a porch that caught the morning light. I want to be precise about this because it matters later. I put the down payment in, a lot of it, and because I'd spent 30 years watching people lose homes in messy divorces, I kept the deed in my name and structured it as a property I leased to them. Meredith knew. Garrett knew too, though he liked to forget it when it suited him. At the closing, he laughed and called it Pop's little tax thing. I let him think that. Old habit. Never correct a man who's underestimating you. But the first couple years, it was fine. Better than fine. My granddaughter, Junie, was born, and I drove up every chance I got. Then the gap started. Meredith calling less. Visits getting shorter. Excuses getting longer. When Garrett's mother, Marlene, moved in after her 2nd marriage fell apart, the change picked up speed, like a stone that had been rolling slow, finally finding the steep part of the hill. I noticed 2 things before I let myself believe either of them. The first was money. I still did the books for the lease, so I saw the accounts. A second mortgage application I never authorized, with my forged signature on a deed I never signed. A home equity line that got opened and drained inside a month. Charges that didn't match the life of an insurance-paying, church-going real estate man. I told myself there was an explanation. I'm a professional skeptic for a living, and I still told myself that because she was my daughter and I didn't want to know. The second was her wrist. Last 4th of July at a cookout, Meredith reached across the table for the potato salad, and her sleeve rode up. There was a bruise around her wrist, purple going green and shaped like fingers. I asked her about it the way you ask when you already know. She said she'd caught it in the car door. I let it go. God forgive me, I let it go because I didn't want a fight that might cost me the little time I got with Junie. That was my mistake, and I've made my peace with the fact that it was mine. Not Garrett's. Mine. I saw a warning and I chose comfort over my own child. People in the comments on stories like this always ask the same thing. Why didn't he do something sooner? They're right to ask. The honest answer is that fear makes cowards out of careful men, and I was afraid that if I pushed, she'd close the door for good and I'd lose her to him completely. So I waited. I told myself I was gathering information. Really, I was just scared. But after the 4th of July, scared or not, I started keeping records the way I knew how. Quietly. I'm a forensic accountant. Documenting is the one thing I'd never been afraid of. So here we are, Thanksgiving. I was in Salt Lake City sitting in a hotel room reviewing exhibits for a deposition when Meredith called. I knew the second I heard her voice. 30 years of listening to people perform calm taught me what real calm sounds like. And this wasn't it. It was the bright, fast, too cheerful voice of someone with a hand over their mouth. "Pop, I know it's late notice," she said, "but is there any chance you could come up for dinner tomorrow? Junie keeps asking for you." "I've got the Halberstam deposition Friday morning, sweetheart. I'm 300 miles south. You know I'd come if I could." A pause. One of those pauses I'd built a career on. Right. Of course. Work. Then, away from the phone, muffled, I heard him. "Garrett, tell the old man not to bother. We're fine without him." And then a woman's laugh behind that. "Marlene." "Garrett, stop," Meredith said, too quiet. "What?" "I'm being honest. When's the last time you showed up for anything?" I felt my jaw set. "Myrrh, is everything all right up there?" "Everything's great. Too fast. Too bright. Garrett's just stressed. The market's slow. You know how it gets around the holidays. Put Junie on, would you?" "She's already in bed." She wasn't. I could hear a child's voice in the background, small and worried, saying "Mommy," in the tone kids use when they don't understand what they're seeing, but they understand it's bad. "Myrrh," I said. "I have to go, Pop. Happy Thanksgiving. I love you." And she hung up before I could say it back. I sat there with the dead phone in my hand and the deposition exhibit spread across the bed, and I did not move for a long time. Then I opened my laptop. Not for the deposition. For the bank logins, the ones I'd been watching all fall. And I started, very calmly, to build. The text came an hour later from a number I didn't recognize. "Mr. Hartley, this is Dale Sutherland, your daughter's neighbor across the street. I'm sorry to send this. I didn't know who else to call. Please look." Then a video. I'd met Dale twice. Retired, lived alone, kept a tidy yard and a sharp eye. The kind of older man who notices things on a street. I almost didn't open the file. Some part of me knew that once I watched it, I couldn't go back to pretending. I watched it. It was Meredith's dining room, shot through the front window from across the street, a little shaky, the glass throwing back the porch light. The Thanksgiving table behind them. Junie's drawings on the fridge. And Garrett, big and loud, leaning over my daughter with his finger in her face. The audio was thin, but I heard enough. Something about the turkey. Something about how she could never do one thing right. Then he hit her. Open hand across the face, hard enough that she turned with it and caught herself on the counter. I have seen a lot of ugly things in conference rooms. I had never seen anything like the feeling that went through me watching my child get struck in the home I paid for. Then Marlene stood up from the table, picked up the gravy boat, and poured it down the front of Meredith's blouse, slow, like she was watering a plant. "You ruined it," she said. "You ruined everything, you stupid girl." And in the corner of the frame, half behind the doorway, was Junie, 6 years old, both hands over her mouth, watching her mother. I watched it 3 times. The first time I shook. The second time I wanted to drive up there and do something I'd regret. The third time, the professional took over. The man who spent his life turning rage into evidence, and I started cataloging. Timestamp. Angles. The bourbon bottle on the counter. The way Garrett swayed. Witness. Chain of custody. I called Dale. "Mr. Hartley," he said, picking up on the first ring, "I'm so sorry. I've heard things over there before, but tonight I saw it, and You did exactly right, I said. Send me the original file, email, the unedited one. Don't post it anywhere. Don't talk to them. Is it quiet over there now? Quiet. Lights are still on. I'm coming. It'll take me about 6 hours. If you hear anything that sounds like she's in danger before then, you call 911. You understand me? Don't wait for me. Yes, sir. Thank you, Dale. You may have saved her life. I packed in 4 minutes. I drove out of that parking garage into a cold Utah night with my hands steady on the wheel and my speedometer exactly at the limit, because the last thing I needed was to be pulled over with what I was carrying in my chest. North on the interstate, empty road, frost on the fields, 6 hours to think, which is both a blessing and a curse. I thought about Meredith at 7, learning to ride a bike, how she'd crash and cry and climb right back on, fearless. I thought about her at her mother's funeral, holding my hand so tight my fingers went white, neither of us crying because we'd both decided to be strong for the other one. I thought about the day I handed Garrett the keys to that house, and he looked me in the eye and said, "I'll take care of her, sir." And I thought about the forged signature on the second mortgage, the drained equity line. The fact that for months I had a folder building on my laptop labeled with her married name, full of documents that, taken together, were going to end this man. Because here's what Garrett never understood. He thought I was a busy old accountant. A tax thing. Pop's little tax thing. He never once stopped to consider what a forensic accountant actually does for a living, or what it means when one of them quietly stops trusting you. Somewhere around the state line, the rage cooled into something better. Rage is hot and stupid, and it gets people hurt. What I felt by hour 4 was cold and patient and absolutely clear. This wasn't going to be a fight. Fights are for men who don't have the paperwork. I had the paperwork. I had the deed, the lease, the forged loan documents, the bank records, a neighbor's time-stamped video, and a security system on that house that fed to an app on my phone, installed 2 years ago, paid for by me, registered to me as the owner, perfectly legal, and completely forgotten by the man who lived under its cameras and thought no one was watching him. I pulled into Bosman a little after 3 in the morning. Frost on every windshield. Christmas lights already up on a few houses, blinking in the dark. I drove past the elementary school where Meredith taught, past the park, onto her street. Dale's porch light was on. I saw his curtain move. Good man. The house lights were still burning. Through the front window I could see them, Garrett and Marlene, up late, the bourbon out. 2 people who thought they'd had a good night. I parked across the street. I sat for 1 minute and I made a phone call. Bosman Police, non-emergency, I said. I need to report a domestic assault. I have video evidence, time-stamped, plus a witness. The suspects are at the residence now. I'm the property owner and I'm parked outside. I gave them the address. I gave them my name. The dispatcher told me officers were on the way and asked me to stay in my vehicle. I appreciate that, I said, and hung up and got out of the car. I'd installed the front door lock myself 6 years ago. I knew exactly where the frame was weakest. I want to tell you I'm not proud of kicking it in. But I'd be lying. There is a particular satisfaction in a man my age driving the heel of his boot through a door he paid for, into a house he owns to get to a child who needs him. The frame split with a crack like a gunshot. Garrett and Marlene came up off that couch like the floor was electric. The bourbon bottle wobbled on the coffee table. Their faces ran through the whole catalog. Shock, confusion, and then Garrett landed where he always landed, on that puffed-up aggression that had charmed my daughter and fooled me. "What the hell do you think you're?" Meredith appeared in the kitchen doorway. There was a fresh bruise swelling under her eye. Her lip was split. Gravy was dried stiff down the front of her blouse, and when she saw me, her whole face broke open with something I hadn't seen in 2 years. That's when I said it. Quiet. 5 words. Get your hands off her. He wasn't even touching her right then. Didn't matter. He knew exactly what I meant. I meant tonight, and I meant the 4th of July, and I meant every bruise I never saw, and I meant never again as long as I drew breath. "Pop," Meredith whispered. "Go pack a bag, sweetheart," I said, not taking my eyes off him. "You and Junie, you're coming with me." Garrett found his courage at the bottom of the bottle and stood up, swaying, trying to make himself big. "She's not going anywhere. Mare, tell your father to get out of my house." "It was never your house," I said. "Sit down." I didn't raise my voice. I have never once in my life needed to raise my voice. 30 years across the table from liars teaches you that the quietest man in the room is usually the one holding the cards. "I've already called the police," I went on. "They'll be here in about 4 minutes. I have video of you striking my daughter tonight. Time stamped. Plus a witness. And before you decide to be stupid, you should know about the cameras." I nodded at the corner of the ceiling, at the little white box he'd walked past 10,000 times. "That's not a smoke detector. That's part of the security system on this house, the one I own, the one registered to me. It's been recording to my account for 2 years, Garrett. Every word. Every time you've put your hands on her. All of it backed up somewhere you will never reach." The color left his face the way water leaves a tub, from red to pink to a sort of gray that told me his stomach had finally caught up with his brain. Marlene made a sound like a kettle. "You've been spying on us." "I've been protecting my daughter and my property," I said. "And I want you to understand something, Marlene. Throwing gravy on a woman while your son beats her isn't being a spectator. In this state, that's assault. You're on the recording, too." She grabbed her purse off the couch like it was a life raft. "Garrett, we have to go." "By all means," I said. "Run. Nothing tells a jury you're innocent like sprinting out the back door with the sirens already coming." And they were coming. I could hear them now, growing under the December quiet. I want to tell you something about that moment, because it's the part nobody understands until they've lived it. I didn't feel powerful. I felt sick. The man my daughter married was standing in front of me, realizing his whole life was about to come apart. And there was a small, stupid, human part of me that almost pitied him. Almost. Then I looked at the bruise blooming under Meredith's eye, and I looked at the doorway where Junie was now standing in dinosaur pajamas with her thumb in her mouth, watching, and the pity died right there on the floor with the broken glass. The sirens turned onto the street. Red and blue washed across the walls. Garrett bolted for the back. Marlene's heels went clicking after him across the hardwood I'd paid to install. I didn't lift a finger to stop them. Where were 2 drunk people going to go in the cold, on foot, with the cruisers already pulling up? I walked past them, toward my daughter. She fell into me the way she had at her mother's funeral, ripping my coat, shaking. Junie came running across the cold floor and wrapped both arms around my leg, and I stood there in the wreckage of a door I'd kicked in, holding the only 2 people in the world that mattered to me, while flashlight beams swept across the front yard. Garrett didn't make it past the fence. The officers walked him back through his own front door in handcuffs, and the look on his face when he saw me still standing there in his living room is something I'll carry to my grave, with a quiet, ugly satisfaction I won't pretend I don't feel. The officer in charge was a steady young woman named Tanner. She took one look at Meredith's face and called for a medic and a female advocate before she took a single statement. The detective came later, a calm man named Reyes, who'd clearly done this 100 times and still hated it. I gave them everything. The neighbor's video, access to the security footage, and then, because I'm who I am, the folder. "There's more," I told Reyes, and I opened my laptop on the kitchen counter. He forged my signature on a second mortgage against this property in September, Here's the deed showing I'm the sole owner. Here's the loan application with a signature that isn't mine. Here's the equity line he opened and emptied. I'd recommend you loop in someone who handles financial crimes, because the assault is going to be the least of his problems." Reyes looked at the screen, then at me, then back at the screen. "What did you say you did for a living?" "Forensic accounting," I said. 31 years. He almost smiled. He had no idea who he married into, did he? "No," I said. "He really didn't. They arrested Marlene, too, 3 doors down, hiding behind a parked truck. Now here's where the law did what it's built to do. Slow and grinding and merciless, which is so much better than anything I could have done with my own 2 hands. The next morning, with Meredith and Junie safe in a hotel under my name, I called my attorney, a sharp woman named Frances Webb, who'd been cleaning up other people's messes longer than I'd been finding them. By noon, we had an emergency protective order. By the end of the week, a formal restraining order. Garrett was ordered to have no contact and to stay 500 feet from Meredith, from Junie, and from the property. The property. That was the easy part, and it was beautiful in its simplicity. I owned it. Free and clear, my name on the deed, no matter what fraudulent paper Garrett had filed. Garrett and Marlene had no legal claim to so much as a fork in that house. Frances filed for their removal. The forged mortgage was voided once the bank saw the fraud, and the bank, having been defrauded itself, was suddenly very interested in pressing charges of its own. I drove up for the removal. I stood in my own living room with a sheriff's deputy and a moving crew, while Garrett, out on bail, tried to walk out with a flat screen and a leather chair. "Receipts in my folder," I said, and slid it across the counter. "I bought that chair, and the TV, and the couch you slept off your bourbon on, and the dishwasher, and the bed, personal belongings only. Clothes, papers, the things that are actually yours. Everything else stays." His hands were shaking. "You took everything from me." "I took nothing," I said. "You forged my name. You hit your wife in front of your daughter. You stopped paying the IRS 2 years ago. Yes, I found that too. You should really learn to shred. Every consequence landing on you right now is something you built with your own hands. I just kept the receipts." He came at me then, shoved me, both hands flat against my chest. 63 years old, and I didn't move an inch because I'd seen it coming in his eyes the second he walked in, and I'd planted my feet. The deputy had him on the ground and cuffed before I'd taken a full breath. "That's a violation of the restraining order," the deputy said, almost bored. "Physical contact on the protected property. You just made your week a whole lot worse." They walked him out for the second time. He pressed his face to the back window of the cruiser and looked at the house, his house he'd always thought. And I watched a building he would never set foot in again disappear behind him. Marlene didn't even finish packing. She threw what she could into a duffel and drove off into the cold, leaving half her things scattered across the bedroom floor like a retreat. The sentencing came that spring, when the cherry trees along the courthouse were just starting to bud. I'll spare you the procedure. Here's what stuck. Garrett pleaded out on the assault. The forgery and the drained equity line he couldn't talk his way out of, not with the bank standing right there beside the prosecutor. The IRS, who I'd been kind enough to introduce to his books, took their pound of flesh in back taxes and penalties. He got probation on the assault and the restraining order violation, a felony conviction on the financial fraud, mandatory anger management, and restitution that would follow him for years. The judge, a woman named Alvarez, who had clearly run out of patience for men like him a long time ago, looked down from the bench and told him plainly that he had beaten his wife in front of his child, defrauded the man who'd given him a home, and shown not 1 ounce of real remorse, only self-pity. "Violate probation once," she said, "and you serve every day of the suspended sentence." He stood there like a man who just understood. Finally, far too late, that the world keeps a ledger and the ledger always balances. Marlene took a plea too and moved to Arizona, where her sister took her in on conditions. She called Meredith once, late, slurring, going on about family and forgiveness and second chances. Meredith listened for about 10 seconds, said, "There's no excuse for what you did," and hung up and blocked the number. Some people never learn. My daughter is not one of them. I didn't go to the sentencing. Frances sent me the transcript and I read it at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee while, 300 miles north, Meredith and Junie moved back into the house. Their house now. I signed it over to her free and clear, deed in her name. No strings, no second mortgage, no Garrett, no Marlene, no memory of any of it in the paperwork. A clean start, which is the most expensive gift there is and the only one worth giving. I want to be careful about how I tell the end of this, because it would be easy to make it sound like a victory lap, and it wasn't. Not exactly. I drove up in June. The house looked like a different house. New paint, curtains that actually let the light in. Garrett's man cave turned into an art room where Junie's drawings covered the walls in loud, fearless color. Meredith and I sat on the back porch with iced tea and watched my granddaughter chase butterflies through a garden I'd helped her plant in April. "Pop," Meredith said after a while, "thank you for seeing it when I couldn't." "You saw it," I said. "You were just surviving it. That's not the same as not seeing." "I keep thinking I should have left the first time, eh?" "No." I stopped her right there. "You don't get to carry that. He's the one who did it. Not you. Not me, even though I waited too long myself. There's no excuse for what he did, and there's nothing you did that earned it. Say it back to me." She did, quietly, and then again like she meant it. "There's no excuse for it." "That's right." Junie came running up the porch steps with a butterfly cupped in both hands, a tiger swallowtail, gold and black and barely holding still. "Grandpa, look, I caught it, but I'm gonna let it go." "That's the right move," I told her. "You can love a thing and let it be free. Toughest thing in the world to do." She opened her hands, and it lifted off, and she shrieked with delight. And Meredith laughed and wiped her eyes at the same time. And I thought, watching my daughter laugh in the sunlight of a house that was finally only hers, that this was what it had all been for. I won't lie and say I felt triumphant. I felt tired. Satisfied, yes. The scales had balanced. The law had done exactly what it was built to do, which is more than any angry old man with his fists ever could. But I also sat there on that porch and thought about a 6-year-old growing up with a father she'll only ever remember through a doorway, both hands over her mouth. Garrett wasn't gone because he died or moved away. He was gone because he chose again and again to be the villain in his own life, and the law simply held him to it. Was that on me? For waiting? Partly. I'll own my part of it till the day I go. Every time I see one of Junie's drawings, and I count 3 figures in it, never 4, Mommy and Grandpa and me, I feel the shape of the space where a father should have stood and decided not to. But here's the thing I've come to understand. After 31 years of finding the truth in other people's numbers and one long winter of finding it in my own family, justice isn't the same as winning. It's just balance. The book's closed, the ledger square. Garrett called me the old man like it was an insult, like patience was weakness, like age meant I'd stopped paying attention. He found out otherwise, and it cost him everything he had, not because I was stronger than him, because I was paying attention when he thought no one was, and I kept the receipts. The old man won, not with rage, with records and patience, and a daughter worth every mile of that midnight drive. If this story meant something to you, hit like, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments, what would you have done if she were your daughter? I'll be reading. Every time I look at one of Junie's drawings taped to that art room wall, I count the figures. 3, never 4. A mother, a grandfather, a little girl. That empty space where a father should be standing is the whole story in a single picture. And it tells me something I've spent my whole life learning the hard way. Garrett didn't end up alone in a cold apartment because the world was cruel to him. He ended up there because of every choice he made, one stacked on the next, until the weight of them finally came down. That's how it always works. You don't get struck by lightning out of a clear sky. You build the storm yourself, day by day, and then you act surprised when it breaks. I think about the man I was last 4th of July, seeing that bruise on my daughter's wrist and choosing to look away because I was scared of losing her. I'll carry that. But I also think the thing that saved her in the end wasn't anger. Anger is loud, and it feels powerful, and it almost never fixes anything. What saved Meredith was that, even when I was afraid, I refused to lie to myself about what I was seeing, and I did the patient, unglamorous work of writing it all down. There's a kind of strength that doesn't look like strength at all. It looks like a tired old man at a kitchen table at 2 in the morning, keeping records, refusing to quit on his child even when quitting would have been easier. If I could put one thing in the hands of every person watching this, it would be those 3 things, because they're the only things that ever truly held. The first is a plain refusal to do wrong to the people who trust you, and the courage to act when someone is being wronged in front of you. The second is the clear-eyed habit of seeing what's actually there, instead of the comfortable story you'd rather believe. And the third is the stubbornness to keep going through fear, through doubt, through the long, slow grind of doing it right instead of doing it fast. Garrett had charm, and charm is nothing. It's a coat of paint over rotten wood. He thought being clever was the same as being good, and he thought I was a slow old man who'd stopped paying attention. He was wrong on every count, and it cost him everything that was ever worth having. Meredith laughs again now. Junie chases butterflies in a garden we planted with our own hands. I didn't win because I was stronger or louder than the man who hurt my daughter. I won because I kept my conscience clean, kept my eyes open, and kept driving north through the dark when everything in me wanted to stop. That's the inheritance I want to leave that little girl. Not the house, not the money, just that. Be good, be awake, don't quit.